Morning. Welcome to the next reading of It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by I was going to call him John Herriot then, James Herriot. And this morning we read chapters 7, 8 and 9 of the 33 chapters in this book. So, Chapter 7. I can see you like pigs, said Mr. Worley, as I edged my way into the pen. You can? Oh, yes, I can always tell. As soon as you went in there nice and quiet and scratched Queenie's back and spoke to her, I said, there's a young man as likes pigs. Oh, good. Well, as a matter of fact, you're absolutely right. I do like pigs. I had in truth been creeping very cautiously past Queenie, wondering just how she was going to react. She was a huge animal, and sows with litters can be very hostile to strangers. When I had come into the building, she had got up from where she was suckling her piglets, and eyed me with a non-committal grunt, reminding me of the number of times I had left a pig pen a lot quicker than I had gone in. A big, barking, gaping-mouthed sow has always been able to make me move very smartly. Now that I was right inside the narrow pen, Queenie seemed to have accepted me. She grunted again, but peaceably, then carefully collapsed on the straw and exposed her udder to the eager little mouse. When she was in this position, I was able to examine her foot. "Ah, that's the one," Mr. Worley said anxiously. "She could hardly hobble when she got up this morning." There didn't seem to be much wrong. A flap of the horn of one claw was a bit overgrown and was rubbing on the sensitive sole, but we didn't usually get called out for little things like that. I cut away the overgrown part and dressed the sore place with our multi-purpose ointment, Pini sedativum, while all the time Mr. Worley knelt by Queenie's head and patted her and sort of crooned into her ear. I couldn't make out the words he used. Maybe it was pig language, because the sow really seemed to be answering him with little soft grunts. Anyway, it worked better than an anaesthetic, and everybody was happy, including the long row of piglets, working busily at the double line of teats. "Right, Mr. Worley." I straightened up and handed him the jar of Peony. "Keep rubbing in a little of that twice a day, and I think she'll be sound in no time." Thank ye. I'm very grateful." He shook my hand vigorously as though I had saved the animal's life. "I'm very glad to meet you for the first time, Mr. Herriot. I've known Mr. Farnham for a year or two, of course, and I think a bit about him. Loves pigs, does that man. Loves them. And his young brother's been here once or twice. I reckon he's fond of pigs too." "Devoted to them, Mr. Worley." "Ah, yes, I thought so. I can always tell." He regarded me for a while with a moist eye, then smiled, well satisfied. We went out into what was really the backyard of an inn. Because Mr. Worley wasn't a regular farmer, he was the landlord of the Langthorpe Falls Hotel, and his precious livestock were crammed into what had once been the stables and coach houses of the inn. They were all Tamworths, and whichever door you opened, you found yourself staring into the eyes of ginger-haired pigs. There were a few porkers, and the odd one being fattened for bacon, but Mr. Worley's pride was his sows. He had 6 of them: Queenie, Princess, Ruby, Marigold, Delilah, and Primrose. For years, expert farmers had been assuring Mr. Worley that he'd never do any good with his sows. If you were going in for breeding, they said, you had to have proper premises. It wasn't a bit of use shoving sows into converted buildings like this. and for years Mr. Worley's sows had responded by producing litters of unprecedented size and raising them with tender care. They were all good mothers and didn't savage their families or crush them clumsily under their bodies. So it turned out with uncanny regularity that at the end of 8 weeks, Mr. Worley had around 12 chunky weaners to take to market. It must have spoiled the farmer's beer. None of them could equal that, and the pill was all the more bitter because the landlord had come from the industrial West Riding, Halifax, I think it was, a frail, short-sighted, little retired newsagent with no agricultural background. By all the laws, he just didn't have a chance. Leaving the yard, we came onto the quiet loop of road where my car was parked. Just beyond, the road dipped steeply into a tree-lined ravine where the Darrow hurled itself over a great broken shelf of rock in its passage to the lower dale. I couldn't see down there from where I was standing, but I could hear the faint roar of the water and could picture the black cliff lifting sheer from the boiling river, and on the other bank the gentle slope of turf where people from the towns came to sit and look in wonder. Some of them were here now. A big, shiny car had drawn up, and its occupants were disembarking. The driver, sleek, fat and oppressive, strolled towards us and called out, "We would like some tea." Mr. Worley swung round on him. "And you can have some, master, but when I'm ready. I have some very important business with this gentleman." He turned his back on the man and began to ask me for final instructions about Queenie's foot. The man was obviously taken aback, and I couldn't blame him. It seemed to me that Mr. Worley might have shown a little more tact. After all, serving food and drink was his living. But as I came to know him better, I realised that his pigs came first and everything else was an irritating intrusion. Knowing Mr. Worley better had its rewards. The time when I feel most like a glass of beer is not in the evening, when the pubs are open, but at around 4:30 on a hot afternoon after wrestling with young cattle in some stifling cowshed. It was delightful to retire, sweating and weary, to the shaded sanctuary of Mr. Worley's back kitchen and sip at the bitter ale, cool, frothing, straight from the cellar below. The smooth working of the peat system was facilitated by the attitude of the local constable, P.C. Dalloway, a man whose benign disposition and elastic interpretation of the licensing laws had made him deeply respected in the district. Occasionally he joined us, took off his uniform jacket, and in shirt and braces consumed a pint with a massive dignity which was peculiar to him. But mostly Mr. Worley and I were on our own, and when he had brought the tall jug up from the cellar, he would sit down and say, "Well now, let's have a piggy talk." His use of this particular phrase made me wonder if perhaps he had some humorous insight into his obsessive preoccupation with the porcine species. Maybe he had, but for all that our conversations seemed to give him the deepest pleasure. We talked about erysipelas and swine fever, brine poisoning and paratyphoid, the relative merits of dry and wet mash, while pictures of his peerless sows with their show rosettes looked down at us from the walls. On one occasion, in the middle of a particularly profound discussion on the ventilation of farrowing houses, Mr. Worley stopped suddenly and, blinking rapidly behind his thick spectacles, burst out, "You know, Mr. Herriot, sitting here talking like this with you, I'm happy as King of England." His devotion resulted in my being called out frequently for very trivial things, and I swore freely under my breath when I heard his voice on the other end of the line at 1 o'clock one morning. "Marigold pigged this afternoon, Mr. Herriot, and I don't think she's got much milk. Little pigs look very hungry to me. Will you come?" I groaned my way out of bed and downstairs and through the long garden to the yard. By the time I had got the car out into the lane, I had begun to wake up, and when I rolled up to the inn was able to greet Mr. Worley fairly cheerfully. But the poor man did not respond. In the light from the oil lamp his face was haggard with worry. "I hope you can do something quick. I'm real upset about her. She's just laid there doing nothing, and it's such a lovely litter. 14 she's had." I could understand his concern as I looked into the pen. Marigold was stretched motionless on her side, while the tiny piglets swarmed around her udder. They were rushing from teat to teat, squealing and falling over each other in their desperate quest for nourishment. And the little bodies had the narrow, empty look which meant they had nothing in their stomachs. I hated to see a litter die off from sheer starvation, but it could happen so easily. There came a time when they stopped trying to suck and began to lie about the pen. After that it was hopeless. Crouching behind the sow with my thermometer in her rectum, I looked along the swelling flank. The hair a rich copper red in the light from the lamp. Did she eat anything tonight? Aye, cleaned up as usual. The thermometer reading was normal. I began to run my hands along the udder, pulling in turn at the teats. The ravenous piglets caught at my fingers with their sharp teeth as I pushed them to one side, but my efforts failed to produce a drop of milk. The udder seemed full, even engorged, but I was unable to get even a bead down to the end of the teat. "There's nought there, is there?" Mr. Worley whispered anxiously. I straightened up and turned to him. "This is simply agalactia. There's no mastitis, and Marigold isn't really ill, but there's something interfering with the let-down mechanism of the milk. She's got plenty of milk, and there's an injection which ought to bring it down." I tried to keep the triumphant look off my face as I spoke, because this was one of my favourite party tricks. There is a flavour of magic in the injection of pituitrin in these cases. It works within a minute, and though no skill is required, the effect is spectacular. Marigold didn't complain as I plunged in the needle and administered 3 cc, whatever that means, deep into the muscle of her thigh. She was too busy conversing with her owner. They were almost nose to nose, exchanging soft pig noises. After I had put away my syringe and listened for a few moments to the cooing sounds from the front end, I thought it might be time. Mr. Worley looked up in surprise as I reached down again to the udder. "What are you doing now?" "Having a feel to see if the milk's come down yet." "Why, damn it, can't be. You've only just given stuff and she's bone dry." Oh, this was going to be good. A roll of drums would be appropriate at this moment. With finger and thumb, I took hold of one of the teats at the turgid back end of the udder. I suppose it is a streak of exhibitionism in me which always makes me send the jet of milk spraying against the opposite wall in these circumstances. This time I thought it would be more impressive if I directed my shot past the innkeeper's left ear, but I got my trajectory wrong and sprinkled his spectacles instead. He took them off and wiped them slowly as if he couldn't believe what he had seen. Then he bent over and tried for himself. "It's a miracle!" he cried as the milk spouted eagerly over his hand. "I've never seen out like it." It didn't take the little pigs long to catch on. Within a few seconds they had stopped their fighting and squealing and settled down in a long silent row. Their utterly rapt expressions all told the same story. They were going to make up for lost time. I went into the kitchen to wash my hands and was using the towel hanging behind the door when I noticed something odd. There was a subdued hum of conversation, the low rumble of many voices. It seemed unusual in a pub at 2 a.m, and I looked through the partly open door into the bar. The place was crowded. In the light of a single weak electric bulb, I could see a row of men drinking at the counter, while others sat behind foaming pint pots on the wooden settles against the walls. Mr. Worley grinned as I turned to him in surprise. "Didn't expect to see this lot, did you? Well, I'll tell you, the real drinkers don't come in till after closing time. Aye, it's a rum 'un. Every night I lock front door and these lads come in the back. I pushed my head round the door for another look. It was a kind of rogues' gallery of Darrowby. All the dubious characters in the town seemed to be gathered in that room. The names which regularly enliven the columns of the weekly newspaper with their activities: drunk and disorderly, non-payment of rates, wife-beating, assault and battery. I could almost see the headings as I went from face to face. I had been spotted. Beery cries of welcome rang out, and I was suddenly conscious that all eyes were fixed on me in the smoky atmosphere. Above the rest, a voice said, "Are you going to have a drink?" What I wanted most was to get back to my bed, but it wouldn't look so good just to close the door and go. I went inside and over to the bar. I seemed to have plenty of friends there, and within seconds was in the centre of a merry group with a pint glass in my hand. My nearest neighbour was a well-known Darrowby worthy called Gobber Newhouse, an enormously fat man who had always seemed able to get through life without drink working at all. He occupied his time with drinking, brawling and gambling. At the moment he was in a mellow mood, and his huge sweating face pushed close to mine. He twisted into a comradely leer. "Now then, Herriot, how's dog trade?" he inquired courteously. Yes. I had never heard my profession described in this way, and was wondering how to answer when I noticed that the company were looking at me expectantly. Mr. Worley's niece, who served behind the bar, was looking at me expectantly too. "6 pints of best bitter, 6 shillings, please," she said, clarifying the situation. I fumbled the money from my pocket. Obviously my first impressions that somebody had invited me to have a drink with them had been mistaken. Looking round the faces, there was no way of telling who had called out, and as the beer disappeared, the group round the bar thinned out like magic. The members just drifted away as though by accident, till I found myself alone. I was no longer an object of interest, and nobody paid any attention as I drained my glass and left. The glow from the pig pen showed through the darkness of the yard, and as I crossed over, the soft rumble of pig and human voices told me that Mr. Worley was still talking things over with his sew. He looked up as I came in, and his face in the dim light was ecstatic. "Mr. Herriot," he whispered, "isn't that a beautiful sight?" He pointed to the little pigs who were lying motionless in a layered heap, sprawled over each other, without plan or pattern, eyes tightly closed, stomachs bloated with Marigold's bountiful fluid. "It is indeed," I said, prodding the sleeping mass with my finger, but getting no response beyond the lazy opening of an eye. "You'd have to go a long way to beat it." And I did share his pleasure. It was one of the most satisfying little jobs. Climbing into the car, I felt that the nocturnal visit had been worthwhile, even though I had been effortlessly duped into buying a round with no hopes of reciprocation. Not that I wanted to drink any more. My stomach wasn't used to receiving pints of ale at 2 a.m, and a few whimpers of surprise and indignation were already coming up. But I was just a bit ruffled by the offhand, professional way those gentlemen in the tap-room had handled me. But winding my way home through the empty moonlit roads, I was aware that the hand of retribution was hovering over that happy band. This was, in fact, a fateful night, because 10 minutes after I had left, Mr. Worley's pub was raided. Perhaps that is a rather dramatic word, but it happened that it was the constable's annual holiday, and the relief man, a young policeman who did not share Mr. Darrowby's liberal views, had come up on his bicycle and pinched everybody in the place. The account of the court proceedings in the Darrowby and Holton Times made good reading. Gobber Newhouse and Company were all fined £2 each and warned as to their future conduct. The magistrates, obviously a heartless lot, had remained unmoved by Gobber's passionate protestations that the beer in the glasses had all been purchased before closing time, and that he and his friends had been lingering over it in light conversation for the subsequent 4 hours. Mr. Worley was fined £15, but I don't think he really minded. Marigold and her litter were doing well. Right. I've turned the light on because it was a bit dark. So chapter 8. This was the last gate. I got out to open it since Tristan was driving and looked back at the farm, a long way below us now, and at the marks our tyres had made on the steep grassy slopes. Strange places, some of these dale farms. This one had no road to it, not even a track. From down there you just drove across the fields from gate to gate till you got to the main road above the valley. And this was the last one. 10 minutes driving and we'd be home. Tristan was acting as my chauffeur, as my left hand had been infected after a bad calving, and I had my arm in a sling. He didn't drive up through the gate, but got out of the car, leaned his back against the gate post and lit a woodbine. Obviously he wasn't in any rush to leave, and with the sun warm on the back of his neck, and the 2 bottles of Whitbreads nestling comfortably in his stomach, I could divine that he felt pretty good. Come to think of it, it had been all right back there. He had taken some warts off a heifer's teats, and the farmer had said he shaped up well for a young'un. "Ah, you really framed that job, lad," and asked us in for a bottle of beer since it was so hot. Impressed by the ecstatic speed with which Tristan had consumed his, he had given him another. Yes, it had been all right, and I could see Tristan thought so too. With a smile of utter contempt, he took a long, deep gulp of moorland air and woodbine smoke and closed his eyes. He opened them quickly as a grinding noise came from the car. "Christ, she's off, Jim!" he shouted. The little Austin was moving gently backwards down the slope. It must have slipped out of gear, and it had no brakes to speak of. We both leaped after it. Tristan was nearest, and he just managed to touch the bonnet with one finger. The speed was too much for him. We gave it up and watched. The hillside was steep, and the little car rapidly gathered momentum, bouncing crazily over the uneven ground. I glanced at Tristan. His mind invariably worked quickly and clearly in a crisis, and I had a good idea what he was thinking. It was only a fortnight since he had turned the hillman over, taking a girl home from a dance. It had been a complete write-off, and the insurance people had been rather nasty about it, and of course Siegfried had gone nearly berserk, and had finished by sacking him finally, once and for all, never wanted to see his face in the place again. But he had been sacked so often, he knew he had only to keep out of his way for a bit, and his brother would forget. And he had been lucky this time, because Siegfried had talked his bank manager into letting him buy a beautiful new Rover, and this blotted everything else from his mind. It was distinctly unfortunate that this should happen when he, as driver, was technically in charge of the Austin. The car appeared now to be doing about 70 miles per hour, hurtling terrifyingly down the long green hill. One by one the doors burst open till all 4 flapped wildly, and the car swooped downwards looking like a huge ungainly bird. From the open doors, bottles, instruments, bandages, cotton wool cascaded out onto the turf, leaving a long broken trail. Now and again a packet of Nux vomica and bicarb stomach powder would fly out and burst like a bomb, splashing vivid white against the green. Tristan threw up his arms. "Look, the bloody thing's going straight for that hut." He drew harder on his woodbine. There was indeed only one obstruction on the bare hillside, a small building near the foot where the land levelled out, and the Austin, as if drawn by a magnet, was thundering straight towards it. I couldn't bear to watch. Just before the impact I turned away and focused my attention on the end of Tristan's cigarette, which was glowing bright red when the crash came. When I looked back down the hill, the building was no longer there. It had been completely flattened, and everything I had ever heard about houses of cards surged into my mind. On top of the shattered timbers, the little car lay peacefully on its side, its wheels still turning lazily. As we galloped down the hill, it was easy to guess Tristan's thoughts. He wouldn't be looking forward to telling Siegfried he had wrecked the Austin. In fact, it was something the mind almost refused to contemplate. But as we neared the scene of devastation, passing on our way syringes, scalpels, bottles of vaccine, it was difficult to see any other outcome. Arriving at the car, we made an anxious inspection. The body had been so bashed and dented before that it wasn't easy to identify any new marks. Certainly the rear end was pretty well caved in, but it didn't show up very much. The only obvious damage was a smashed rear light. Our hopes rising, we set off for the farm for help. The farmer greeted us amiably. "Now then, you lads, has to come back for more beer?" "It wouldn't come amiss," Tristan replied. "We've had a bit of an accident." We went into the house and the hospitable man opened some more bottles. He didn't seem disturbed when he heard of the demolition of the hut. "Nay, that's not mine. Belongs to golf club. It's the clubhouse." Tristan's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, no. Don't say we've flattened the headquarters of the Darrowby Golf Club." "Aye, lad, you must have. It's the only built wooden building in them fields. I rent that part of my land to the club, and they've made a little 9-hole course. Don't worry, hardly anybody plays on it. Mainly bank manager, and I don't like that fella." Mr. Prescott got a horse out of the stable, and we went back to the car and pulled it upright again. Trembling a little, Tristan climbed in and pressed the starter. The sturdy little engine burst into a confident roar immediately, and he drove carefully over the prostrate wooden walls onto the grass. "Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Prescott," he shouted. "We seem to have got away with it. Champion, lad, champion. You're as good as new." Then the farmer winked and held up a finger. "Now you say nowt about this job, and I'll say nowt. Right?" "Right. Come on, Jim. Get in." Tristan put his foot down, and we chugged thankfully up the hill once more. He seemed thoughtful on the way, and didn't speak till we got onto the road. Then he turned to me. "You know, Jim, it's all very well, but I've still got to confess to Siegfried about that rear light. And of course I'll get the lash again. Don't you think it's just a bit hard the way I get blamed for everything that happens to his cars? You've seen it over and over again. He gives me a lot of bloody old wrecks to drive, and when they start to fall to bits, it's always my fault. The bloody tyres are all down on the canvas, but if I get a puncture, there's hell to pay. It isn't fair." "Well, Siegfried isn't the man to suffer in silence, you know," I said. "He's got to lash out, and you're nearest." Tristan was silent for a moment, then he took a deeper drag at his woodbine, blew out his cheeks, and assumed a judicial expression. "Mind you, I'm not saying I was entirely blameless with regard to the hillman. I was taking that sharp turn in Dringley at 60 with my arm round a little nurse. But all in all, I've just had sheer bad luck. In fact, Jim, I'm a helpless victim of prejudice." Siegfried was out of sorts when we met in the surgery. He was starting a summer cold and was sniffly and listless, but he still managed to raise a burst of energy at the news. "You bloody young maniac! It's the rear light now, is it? God help me! I think all I work for is to pay for the repair bills you run up. You'll ruin me before you're finished. Go on, get to hell out of it." "I'm finished with you." Tristan retired with dignity and followed his usual policy of lying low. He didn't see his brother until the following morning. Siegfried's condition had deteriorated. The cold had settled in his throat, always his weak spot, and he was down with laryngitis. His neck was swathed in vinegar-soaked Thermogene, and when Tristan and I came into the bedroom, he was feebly turning over the pages of the Darrowby and Holton Times. He spoke in a tortured whisper. "Have you seen this? It says here that the golf clubhouse was knocked down yesterday, and there's no clue as to how it happened. Damn funny thing. On Prescott's land, isn't it?" His head jerked suddenly from the pillow, and he glared at his brother. "You were there yesterday," he croaked. Then he fell back muttering, "Oh, no. No, I'm sorry, it's too ridiculous, and it's wrong of me to blame you for everything." Tristan stared. He had never heard this kind of talk from Siegfried before. I too felt a pang of anxiety. Could my boss be delirious? Siegfried swallowed painfully. "I've just had an urgent call from Armitage of Sawton. He's got a cow down with milk fever, and I want you to drive James out there straight away. Go on now, get moving." Afraid I can't," Tristan shrugged. "Jim's car is in Hammond's garage. They're fixing that light. It'll take them about an hour." "Oh, God, yes. And they said they couldn't let us have a spare. Well, Armitage is in a bit of panic. That cow could be dead in an hour. What the hell can we do?" "There's the rover," Tristan said quietly. Siegfried's form stiffened suddenly under the blankets, and wild terror flickered in his eyes. For a few moments his head rolled about on the pillow, and his long bony fingers picked nervously at the quilt. Then, with an effort, he heaved himself onto his side and stared into his brother's eyes. He spoke slowly, and the agonized hissing of his voice lent menace to his words. "Right, so you'll have to take the rover. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd let a wrecker like you drive it. But just let me tell you this. If you put a scratch on that car, I'll kill you. I'll kill you with my own 2 hands." The old pattern was asserting itself. Siegfried's eyes had begun to bulge. A dark flush was creeping over his cheeks, while Tristan's face had lost all expression. Using the last remnants of his strength, Siegfried hoisted himself even higher. "Now, do you really think you are capable of driving that car 5 miles to Sawton and back without smashing it up? All right, then, get on with it, and just remember what I've said." Tristan withdrew in offended silence, and as I followed him, I took a last look at the figure in the bed. Siegfried had fallen back and was staring at the ceiling with feverish eyes. His lips moved feebly, as though he were praying. Outside the room, Tristan rubbed his hands delightfully. "What a break, Jim! A chance in a lifetime. You know, I'd never thought I'd get behind the wheel of that rover in 100 years. He dropped his voice to a whisper. "Just shows you. Everything happens for the best." 5 minutes later he was backing carefully out of the yard and into the lane, and once on the Sawton road I saw he was beginning to enjoy himself. For 2 miles the way ahead stretched straight and clear, except for a milk lorry approaching in the far distance. A perfect place to see what the rover could do. He nestled down in the rich leather upholstery and pressed his foot hard on the accelerator. We would be doing an effortless 80 when I saw a car beginning to overtake the milk lorry. It was an ancient square-topped high-built vehicle like a biscuit tin on wheels, and it had no business trying to overtake anything. I waited for it to pull back, but it still came on, and the lorry, perhaps with a sporting driver, seemed to be spurting to make a race of it. With increasing alarm I saw the 2 vehicles abreast, and bearing down on us only a few hundred yards away, and not a foot of space on either side of them. Of course the old car would pull in behind the lorry. It had to. There was no other way. But it was taking a long time about it. Tristan jammed on his brakes. If the lorry did the same, the other car would just be able to dodge between. But within seconds I realised nothing like that was going to happen, and as they thundered towards us, I resigned myself with dumb horror to a head-on collision. Just before I closed my eyes, I had a fleeting glimpse of a large, alarmed face behind the wheel of the old car. Then something hit the left side of the rover with a rending crash. When I opened my eyes, we were stationary. There was just Tristan and myself staring straight ahead at the road, empty and quiet, curving ahead of us into the peaceful green of the hills. I sat motionless, listening to my thumping heart. Then I looked over my shoulder and saw the lorry disappearing at high speed round a distant bend. In passing I studied Tristan's face with interest. I had never seen a completely green face before. After quite a long time, feeling a draught from the left, I looked carefully round in that direction. There were no doors on that side. One was lying by the roadside a few yards back, and the other hung from a single broken hinge. As I watched, this one too clattered onto the tarmac with a note of flat finality. Slowly, as in a dream, I got out and surveyed the damage. The left side of the Rover was a desert of twisted metal, where the old car, diving for the verge at the last split second, had ploughed its way. Tristan had flopped down on the grass, his face blank. A nasty scratch on the paintwork might have sent him into a panic, but this wholesale destruction seemed to have numbed his senses. But this state didn't last long. He began to blink, then his eyes narrowed and he felt for his woodbines. His agile mind was back at work, and it wasn't difficult to read his thoughts. What was he going to do now? It seemed to me, after a short appraisal of the situation, that he had three possible courses of action. First and most attractive, he could get out of Darrowby permanently, emigrate if necessary. Second, he could go straight to the railway station and board a train for Broughton, where he could live quietly with his mother till this had blown over. Third, and it didn't bear thinking about, he could go back to Skeldale House and tell Siegfried he had smashed up his new Rover. As I weighed up the possibilities, I spotted the old car which had hit us. It was lying upside down in a ditch about 50 yards down the road. Hurrying towards it, I could hear a loud cackling coming from the interior, and I remembered it was market day, and many of the farmers would be bringing in crates of hens and maybe 20 or 30 dozen eggs to sell. We peered in through a window, and Tristan gasped. A fat man, obviously unhurt, was lying in a great pool of smashed eggs. His face wore a wide, reassuring smile. In fact, his whole expression was ingratiating as far as it could be seen through the mask of egg which covered his features. The rest of the interior was filled with frantic hens, which had escaped from their crates in the crash, and were hunting for a way out. The fat man, smiling up happily from his bed of eggs, was shouting something, but it was difficult to hear him above the wild cackling. I managed to pick up odd phrases. "Very sorry indeed. Entirely my fault. I'll make good the damage." The words floated up cheerfully while the hens scampered across the man's beaming face, and yolks coursed sluggishly down his clothes. With an effort, Tristan managed to wrench open a door, and was driven back immediately by a rush of hens. Some of them galloped off in various directions till they were lost to sight, while their less adventurous companions began to peck about philosophically by the roadside. "Are you all right?" Tristan shouted. Yes, young man, I'm not hurt. Please don't worry about me." The fat man struggled vainly to rise from the squelching mass. I am sorry about this, but I'll see you right, you can be sure." He held up a dripping hand, and we helped him out onto the road. Despite his saturated clothes and the pieces of shell sticking to his hair and moustache, he hadn't lost his poise. In fact, he radiated confidence, the same confidence, I thought, which made him think his old car could overtake that speeding lorry. He laid a hand on Tristan's shoulder. "There's a simple explanation, you know. The sun got in me eyes." It was 12 noon, and the fat man had been driving due north, but there didn't seem much point in arguing. We lifted the shattered doors from the road, put them inside the Rover, drove to Sawton, treated the milk fever cow, and returned to Darrowby. Tristan gave me a single despairing look, then squared his shoulders and marched straight to his brother's room. I followed close, on his heels. Siegfried was worse. His face was red with fever and his eyes burned deeply in their pockets. He didn't move when Tristan walked over to the foot of the bed. "Well, how did you get on?" The whisper was barely audible. "Oh, fine. The cow was on her feet when we left. There is just one thing. I had a bit of a bump with the car." Siegfried had been wheezing stertorously and staring at the ceiling, but the breathing stopped as if it had been switched off. There was an eerie silence. Then from the completely motionless figure 2 strangled words escaped. "What happened?" "Wasn't my fault. Chap tried to overtake a lorry and didn't make it. Caught one side of the rover." Again the silence, and again the whisper. "Much damage?" "Front and rear wings pretty well mangled, I'm afraid, and both doors torn off the left side." As if operated by a powerful spring, Zivri came bolt upright in the bed. It was startlingly like a corpse coming to life, and the effect was heightened by the coils of Firmagene, which had burst loose and trailed in shroud-like garlands from the haggard head. The mouth opened wide in a completely soundless scream. "You bloody fool! You're sacked!" He crashed back onto the pillow, as though the mechanism had gone into reverse, and lay very still. We watched him for a few moments in some anxiety, but when we heard the breathing restart, we tiptoed from the room. On the landing, Tristan blew out his cheeks and threw a woodbine from its packet. "A tricky little situation, Jim, but you know what I always say." He struck a match and pulled the smoke down blissfully. "Things usually turn out better than you expect." And Chapter 9. A lot of the Dales' farms were anonymous, and it was a help to find this one so plainly identified. "Heston Grange," it said on the gate, in bold black capitals. I got out of the car and undid the latch. It was a good gate too, and swung easily on its hinges, instead of having to be dragged round with a shoulder under the top spar. The farmhouse lay below me, massive, grey-stoned, with a pair of bow windows, which some prosperous Victorian had added to the original structure. It stood on a flat, green neck of land, in a loop of the river, and the lushness of the grass and the quiet fertility of the surrounding fields contrasted sharply with the stark hills behind. Towering oaks and beeches sheltered the house, and a thick pine wood covered the lower slopes of the fell. I walked round the buildings, shouting, as I always did, because some people considered it a subtle insult to go to the house and ask if the farmer was in. Good farmers are indoors only at meal times, but my shouts drew no reply, so I went over and knocked at the door, set deep among the weathered stones. A voice answered, "Come in," and I opened the door into a huge stone-flagged kitchen with hams and sides of bacon hanging from hooks in the ceiling. A dark girl in a check blouse and green linen slacks was kneading dough in a bowl. She looked up and smiled. "Sorry I couldn't let you in. I've got my hands full." She held up her arms, floury white to the elbow. "That's all right. My name is Herriot. I've come to see a calf. It's lame, I understand." "Yes, we think he's broken his leg. Probably got his foot in a hole when he was running about. If you don't mind waiting a minute, I'll come with you. My father and the men are in the fields. I'm Helen Alderson, by the way." She washed and dried her arms and pulled on a pair of short Wellingtons. "Take over this bread, will you, Meg?" she said to an old woman who came through from an inner room. "I have to show Mr. Herriot the calf." Outside she turned to me and laughed. "We've got a bit of a walk, I'm afraid. He's in one of the top buildings. Look, you can just see it up there." She pointed to a squat stone barn high on the fell side. I knew all about these top buildings. They were scattered all over the high country, and I got a lot of healthy exercise going round them. They were used for storing hay and other things, and as shelters for the animals on the hill pastures. I looked at the girl for a few seconds. "Oh, that's all right. I don't mind. I don't mind in the least." We went over the field to a narrow bridge, spanning the river, and following her across. I was struck by a thought. This new fashion of women wearing slacks might be a bit revolutionary, but there was a lot to be said for it. The path led upward through the pine wood, and here the sunshine was broken up into islands of brightness among the dark trunks. The sound of the river grew faint, and we walked softly on a thick carpet of pine needles. It was cool in the wood, and silent except when a bird call echoed through the trees. 10 minutes of hard walking brought us out again into the hot sun on the open moor, and the path curved steeper still round a series of rocky outcrops. I was beginning to puff, but the girl kept up a brisk pace, swinging along with easy strides. I was glad when we reached the level ground on the top, and the barn came in sight again. When I opened the half door, I could hardly see my patient in the dark interior, which was heavy with the fragrance of hay piled nearly to the roof. He looked very small and sorry for himself, with his dangling foreleg, which trailed uselessly along the straw floor as he tried to walk. "Will you hold his head while I examine him, please?" I said. The girl caught the calf expertly, one hand under its chin, the other holding an ear. As I felt my way over the leg, the little creature stood trembling, his face a picture of woe. "Well, your diagnosis was correct. Clean fracture of the radius and ulna, but there's very little displacement, so it should do well with a plaster on it." I opened my bag, took out some plaster bandages, then filled a bucket with water from a nearby spring. I soaked one of the bandages and applied it to the leg, following it with a second and a third till the limb was encased in a rapidly hardening white sheath from elbow to foot. "We'll just wait a couple of minutes till it hardens, then we can let him go." I kept tapping the plaster till I was satisfied it was set like stone. "All right," I said finally, "he can go now." The girl released the head and the little animal trotted away. "Look," she cried, "he's putting his weight on it already. And doesn't he look a lot happier?" I smiled. I felt I had really done something. The calf felt no pain now that the broken ends of the bone were immobilized, and the fear which always demoralizes a herd animal had magically vanished. "Yes," I said, "he certainly has perked up quickly." My words were almost drowned by a tremendous bellow, and the patch of blue above the half door was suddenly obscured by a large shaggy head. Two great liquid eyes stared down anxiously at the little calf, and it answered with a high-pitched bawl. Soon a deafening duet was in progress. "That's his mother," the girl shouted above the din. "Poor old thing! She's been hanging about here all morning wondering what we've done with her calf. She hates being separated from him." I straightened up and drew the bolt on the door. "Well, she can come in now." The big cow almost knocked me down as she rushed past me. Then she started a careful sniffling inspection of her calf, pushed him around with her muzzle, and making muffled lowing noises deep in her throat. The little creature submitted happily to all the fuss, and when it was over, and his mother was finally satisfied, he limped round to her udder and began to suck heartily. "Soon got his appetite back," I said, and we both laughed. I threw the empty tins into my bag and closed it. "He'll have to keep the plaster on for a month, so if you'll give me a ring, then I'll come back and take it off. Just keep an eye on him, and make sure his leg doesn't get sore round the top of the bandage." As we left the barn, the sunshine and the sweet warm air met us like a high wave. I turned and looked across the valley to the soaring green heights, smooth, enormous, hazy in the noon heat. Beneath my feet the grassy slopes fell away steeply to where the river glimmered among the trees. "It's wonderful up here," I said. "Just look at that gorge over there, and that great hill. I suppose you could call it a mountain." I pointed at a giant which heaved its heather-mottled shoulders high above the others. "That's Heskett Fell, nearly 2,500 feet, and that's Eddleton just beyond, and Wedderfell on the other side, and Culver and Senna." The names with their wild Nordic ring fell easily from her tongue. She spoke of them like old friends, and I could sense the affection in her voice. We sat down on the warm grass of the hillside. A soft breeze pulled at the heads of the moorland flowers. Somewhere a curlew cried. Darrowby and Skeldale House and veterinary practice seemed 1,000 miles away. "You're lucky to live here," I said, "but I don't think you need me to tell you that." "No, I love this country. There's nowhere else quite like it." She paused and looked slowly around her. "I'm glad it appeals to you too. A lot of people find it too bare and wild. It almost seems to frighten them." I laughed. Yes, I know, but as far as I'm concerned, I can't help feeling sorry for all the thousands of vets who don't work in the Orchard Ales. I began to talk about my work. Then, almost without knowing, I was going back over my student days, telling her of the good times, the friends I had made, and our hopes and aspirations. I surprised myself with my flow of talk. I wasn't much of a chatterbox usually, and I felt I must be boring my companion, but she sat quietly looking over the valley, her arms around her green-clad legs, nodding at times as though she understood, and she laughed in all the right places. I wondered too at the silly feeling that I would like to forget all about the rest of the day's duty and stay up here on this sunny hillside. It came to me that it had been a long time since I had sat down and talked to a girl of my own age. I had almost forgotten what it was like. I didn't hurry back down the path and through the scented pine wood, but it seemed no time at all before we were walking across the wooden bridge and over the field to the farm. I turned with my hand on the car door. Well, I'll see you in a month. It sounded like an awful long time. The girl smiled. Thank you for what you've done. As I started the engine, she waved and went into the house. Helen Alderson, Siegfried said later over lunch. Of course I know her. Lovely girl. Tristan across the table made no comment, but he laid down his knife and fork, raised his eyes reverently to the ceiling and gave a long, low whistle. Then he started to eat again. Siegfried went on. Oh, yes, I know her very well, and I admire her. Her mother died a few years ago, and she runs the whole place. Cooks and looks after her father, and a younger brother and sister. He spooned some mashed potatoes onto his plate. Any men friends? Oh, half the young bloods in the district are chasing her, but she doesn't seem to be going steady with any of them. Choosy sort, I think.